I'm Warren, 48 male. I live in a quiet little house that's felt too big for the past 3 years, in a town that feels smaller every day. By trade, I'm the director of risk protocol for a major tech firm, which is a fancy way of saying I'm the guy who reads the fine print so nobody else has to. This is the story of how the fine print I wrote became the only thing that mattered when the man in charge decided my 12 years of loyalty were worth nothing. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The sterile, recycled air of the Selcor Dynamics building always felt thinner after midnight, as if the building itself was finally exhaling after a long day of corporate posturing. I sat under the cold, fluorescent lights of my office, the city of Chicago a glittering, indifferent tapestry 48 floors below. It was a view meant for conquerors, for the titans of industry who occupied the corner offices with mahogany desks and skyline panoramas. My office was interior, windowless, and purely functional, a concrete box for a functional man. For 12 years, this box had been my second home, the place where I'd traded family dinners and school plays for the quiet security of a six-figure salary and the promise of a future I could build for my son. That promise, it turned out, was built on a foundation of sand. My life hadn't always been about navigating the treacherous waters of corporate compliance. Before the starched collars and quarterly reports, I wore a different uniform. For 8 years, I was a Marine. The Corps teaches you a lot of things, but the most important lesson is about the integrity of the line. You hold your position, you protect the person next to you, and you trust that your command has your back. It's a simple, unbreakable code. Honor isn't a word you throw around in a mission statement. It's the currency you live and die by. I'd carried that ethos with me into the civilian world, naively assuming that a company, especially one as successful as Selcor, would operate on a similar principle of mutual respect and earned trust. I was, in no uncertain terms, an idiot. The glow of my monitor cast long shadows across my desk, illuminating stacks of regulatory briefs and international trade agreements, the tedious, unglamorous armor that protected Selcor from billions in potential fines. I was the company's ghost, the invisible force ensuring that every product launch, every software update, every single line of code adhered to a labyrinth of global laws. It wasn't exciting work. It didn't involve schmoozing with venture capitalists or giving charismatic keynote speeches. It was the painstaking, methodical work of a man who understood that true strength isn't in the grand gesture, but in the flawless execution of details. While our CEO was being photographed for business magazines, I was in this box, reading 1,000-page documents from the European Union's Data Protection Agency. I kept the ship afloat while the captain took credit for the calm seas. My real mission, the one that kept me here long after the ambition had faded, wasn't for Selcor. It was for my son, Tyler. He was 19, a good kid with a sharp mind and his mother's kind eyes. He also had my stubborn streak, which meant he was working double shifts at a logistics warehouse to pay his way through community college, refusing to let me carry the burden alone. He'd come home late, smelling of cardboard and exhaustion, and sit at the kitchen table with a stack of used textbooks, his brow furrowed in concentration. He never complained, not once. But I saw the fatigue in his posture, the dark circles under his eyes. I saw a brilliant young man dimming his own light to get by. 3 years ago, I lost my wife Sarah to a fight she should have won. In one of our last conversations, during a quiet moment in the sterile hush of her hospital room, I made her a promise. The hum of the machines was a constant, grim soundtrack to our lives then. I held her hand, its warmth a fading comfort, and I told her, Tyler will have every opportunity. He'll go to a great school, the kind we only dreamed of. He won't have to struggle, I promise you. She squeezed my hand, a flicker of her old strength in her grip, and whispered, I know you'll take care of him, Warren. That promise became my sole directive. The annual performance bonus, the one I had earned every single year for over a decade, was the key. It wasn't just money, it was Tyler's ticket out of the warehouse and into the 4-year engineering program he talked about with such quiet passion. It was the fulfillment of my vow to Sarah. It was 12 years of perfect compliance records, of averted disasters, of saving the company from financial ruin time and time again. I wasn't a rainmaker, I was the guy W. Ho built the ark and checked it for leaks, board by board. The bonus was my due. It was the company's way of honoring its end of the bargain. My phone buzzed on the desk, a text from Tyler. Just got on my break, night shift pays well, Dad. Don't worry so much about the tuition for next semester, we'll figure it out. I read the words and a cold, heavy anger settled in my gut. My son, my brilliant, hardworking son, was sacrificing his youth and his potential because he didn't want to be a burden. He was trying to protect me just as I was trying to protect his future. We were a two-man army, fighting a war on two fronts. and I was supposed to be the one with the heavy artillery. I looked back at the screen at the email that had been sitting there unopened for the last 10 minutes. The subject line was deceptively cheerful, annual performance bonus confirmation. My finger hovered over the mouse. This was it. This was the moment the weight would be lifted. This was the ammunition I needed to win the war for Tyler to keep my promise to Sarah. With a steadying breath, I clicked. The email opened and the world tilted on its axis. There in stark, bold font was a number that didn't make sense. It wasn't reduced. It wasn't a fraction of what I expected. It was a perfect, unapologetic, soul-crushing zero. $0. Beneath it, a crisp digital signature that felt like a slap in the face. Bryant Caldwell, CEO. It was clean, arrogant, and final. My 12 years of service, my spotless record, my promise to my dying wife, all of it had just been valued at precisely nothing. And in that moment, sitting alone in my concrete box high above the sleeping city, the Marine I thought I'd left behind started to wake up. The zero on the screen wasn't just a number, it was a statement. It was a meticulously crafted insult delivered with the cold, impersonal efficiency of a corporate execution. For a long moment, I just stared, my mind refusing to process the information. My brain, trained to find patterns and anomalies in complex data, was short-circuiting. There had to be a mistake, a typo, a glitch in the payroll system. Human error was common, even in a multi-billion-dollar company like Cellcore. But as my eyes scanned the accompanying text, the cold dread in my stomach confirmed this was no accident. Attached to the $0 confirmation was a brief, infuriatingly condescending note from Bryant Caldwell himself. It was a masterclass in corporate doublespeak, filled with buzzwords that meant nothing and everything all at once. He wrote of newly implemented efficiency standards and a strategic streamlining of our compensation structures to incentivize forward-facing growth. It was prose designed to obscure, to deflect, to make the person being screwed over feel like they were simply on the wrong side of innovation. He was lecturing me, a man who had single-handedly built the compliance frameworks that enabled his forward-facing growth, about efficiency. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was breathtaking. Bryant Caldwell was everything I'd learned to despise during my time in the service. He was the quintessential trust fund kid, handed the keys to a kingdom he didn't build. He de-glided through life on a current of family money and Ivy League connections, collecting a Harvard MBA like it was a souvenir. While men like me were learning about chain of command in the sweltering heat of places he couldn't find on a map, Bryant was probably learning how to network at a yacht club. He was what we used to call a REMF in the Marines, a rear echelon mother asterisk asterisk. All spit polish and swagger with no substance, no grit, no understanding of what it meant to earn your place. He'd never had to hold the line. He'd never had to rely on the person next to him to save his skin. He saw people not as assets to be valued, but as resources to be expended. This $0 bonus was proof. It wasn't just a financial decision, it was a power play. It was Bryant, the new CEO for the last 2 years, consolidating his control by cutting loose the old guard, the people who remembered the company before he arrived, the ones who knew he was more style than substance. I didn't play the political games. I didn't laugh at his bad jokes in board meetings or join his exclusive golf outings. I just did my job, quietly and effectively, assuming that competence was its own reward. In Bryant's world, competence without flattery was a threat. My mind flashed back to all the sacrifices. The missed baseball games when Tyler was little. The anniversaries I'd celebrated with a phone call from a hotel room in Brussels during a regulatory audit. The time I missed Tyler's high school graduation ceremony because I was dealing with an emergency licensing review in Asia. A review that, if failed, would have cost Cellcore over $500 million. I got a company-wide email of thanks for that one, with Bryant's name CC'd at the top. Warren's dedicati. On is beyond measure, it read. That dedication was now worth $0. I thought of Sarah telling me gently that I was working too hard, that the company was taking more than it was giving. Just one more project, honey, I'd always say. After this launch, things will calm down, we'll take that trip to the coast. We never took that trip, the projects never ended, and now the company I had given so much of my life to had decided that life was worthless. As if on cue, another email landed in my inbox. This one was company-wide, a glossy newsletter from the HR department. The subject line was a cruel joke, Cellcore's core values, family first. I clicked it open, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. It was filled with stock photos of smiling, diverse families and saccharine testimonials from employees about work-life balance. It talked about the importance of prioritizing what truly matters, of putting loved ones before deadlines. It was a beautifully designed lie, a piece of propaganda meant to placate the workforce, while the man at the top treated his employees like disposable cogs in his machine. The hypocrisy was so thick I could practically taste it. The same company that had praised my dedication for choosing work over my son's graduation was now lecturing me on the importance of family. My phone buzzed again. It was Tyler. He must have seen that I'd read his text but hadn't replied. He was calling now, probably worried. I let it ring once, twice, then silenced it. I couldn't talk to him right now. I couldn't let him hear the defeat in my voice. He needed to believe his old man had things under control. He needed to believe that the world was a place where hard work and integrity were rewarded. Hearing my voice right now would shatter that illusion. The anger I felt wasn't the hot, explosive kind that leads to shouting or breaking things. That kind of anger is a fire that burns out quickly. This was different. This was a cold anger, the kind that settles deep in your bones and crystallizes into something hard and sharp. It was a quiet, calculating fury that didn't demand release, but instead demanded a plan. My son was out there, sacrificing his sleep and his future, because a man who had never sacrificed anything in his life decided my loyalty had expired. Bryant Caldwell had mistaken my quiet professionalism for weakness. He had mistaken my lack of political maneuvering for a lack of strategic ability. He had fundamentally misunderstood the man he was dealing with. He saw a middle-aged paper pusher. He didn't see the Marine who had been trained to analyze his enemy, to anticipate their moves, and to prepare the battlefield long before the first shot was ever fired. I closed the laptop, the glowing zero vanishing into the darkness. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window at the end of the hall and looked down at the city. The cars below were tiny streams of light, each one carrying someone home to their family, to a life outside these glass and steel towers. They probably looked up at this building and saw power, success, a world of untouchable elites. They didn't see the windowless rooms, the missed moments, the broken promises. They didn't see a man who had just been told his entire professional life was a rounding error. But as I stood there, the cold anger inside me began to solidify into a singular, clear thought. Bryant Caldwell had made a critical error. He thought he was just signing a document to cut costs. He had no idea he had just armed a weapon that I had built and buried years ago. He thought the story was over. In reality, it was just beginning. The morning after felt like waking up in a foreign country. The familiar routine of my commute, the morning coffee, the walk through the lobby, it all seemed detached, like I was watching a movie of someone else's life. The betrayal had severed a cord and now I was adrift. When I got to my desk, Roy Martinez was already there, holding 2 cups of coffee. Roy was a former Navy guy, a solid, no-nonsense analyst in my department who had worked with me for the better part of a decade. We didn't talk much about our service days, but there was an unspoken understanding between us, a shared language of discipline and duty that the civilian world never quite grasped. He set a cup on my desk, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes told a different story. They were filled with a grim understanding. "Heard about the bonuses," he said, keeping his voice low. "You know they're not going to fix it, right? There's no appeal, no HR complaint that's gonna make them reverse course." I took a slow sip of the coffee. It was black, just how I liked it. "I know, Roy." "So what's the play?" he asked. It wasn't an idle question. It was the question one veteran asks another when command has gone rogue. It meant, "What's the mission?" "The play is to do my job," I said, my voice even. "Come in, put in my hours, and go home." Roy studied my face for a long moment, searching for something. He must have found it because he gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a nod of trust, of acknowledging a message that hadn't been spoken aloud. "Right," he said. "Well, if you need a second set of eyes on any paperwork, you know where I am." He clapped my shoulder once and walked away. The offer was clear. He was my backup, no questions asked. After he left, I turned to my computer. The first thing I did wasn't to look for a new job or to draft an angry resignation letter. It was to conduct a quiet, methodical damage assessment. I began to pull up the project files for every major initiative I had led or contributed to over the past 2 years. What I found was chilling. It was a systematic, deliberate campaign of erasure. My name had been scrubbed from everything. The Athenis Grid Protocol, a multi-billion-dollar global launch I had personally designed the compliance architecture for, now listed Preston Wade as the lead strategist. The internal audit system I had overhauled to save the company millions in operational waste. Preston Wade's name was on the charter. The regulatory approvals I had secured through months of painstaking negotiation with foreign governments. Signed, sealed, and credited to Preston Wade. Preston was a 32-year-old MBA with a vocabulary composed entirely of corporate buzzwords like synergy, paradigm shift, and leveraging verticals. He was a nice enough kid, utterly harmless and equally clueless. He wouldn't know a compliance statute if it was tattooed on his forehead. Bryant had brought him in about 18 months ago, and Preston had attached himself to the CEO like a remora on a shark, talking a big game about disruptive innovation while contributing absolutely nothing of substance. Now, he was being retroactively positioned as the brains behind my entire body of work. The thoroughness of the deception was almost impressive. They had gone back through years of digital archives, amending documents, altering project logs, and even doctoring photographs. I found a picture from the 2023 Global Tech Summit in Singapore. I remembered that day clearly. I had given a presentation on cross-border data security that had been a huge success. But in the photo on the company's internal server, it wasn't my face at the podium. It was Preston's, crudely but effectively photoshopped onto my body. They hadn't just stolen my bonus, they were stealing my history, rewriting my career to justify pushing me out. They were building a narrative where I was a relic, a piece of obsolete hardware being replaced by a newer, shinier model. Anyone else would have felt panic, a desperate need to fight back to scream about the injustice. But as I scrolled through the evidence of my own erasure, all I felt was that same cold, steady calm. They were sloppy. In their arrogant rush to build a new reality, they had focused on the surface, the reports, the presentations, the public-facing documents. They had changed the paint on the walls, but they had forgotten to check the foundation. They had forgotten about the master system, the core of it all, the one place that truly mattered. And in that master system, deep within the architecture that I alone had built, my fingerprints were indelible. More importantly, my little insurance policy was still there, dormant and waiting. They could Photoshop my face out of 1,000 pictures, but they couldn't erase the lines of code that were now a part of the company's DNA. They thought they were in control of the narrative, but the real story was written in a language they didn't even know how to read. My phone rang, and this time I answered. It was Tyler, his voice bright with an optimism that twisted my gut. Hey Dad, just saw the company newsletter they sent out. The one about the Athenis grid launch next month. That's your project, right? It sounds huge. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling tiles. The irony was a physical weight. Yeah, son, it's pretty big. That's awesome. Must be exciting to see all your hard work about to pay off. Billions of dollars, man. You must be getting a pretty sweet bonus for that one. I almost laughed. The sound that came out was more like a choked cough. My son, the reason for all of this, had no idea that his father had just been written out of the story completely. He had no idea the sweet bonus was a kick in the teeth. We'll see what happens, Ty, I managed to say, keeping my voice steady. How are classes? Good, Professor Collins said I have a real shot at the transfer program if I ace my finals. I know we talked about money, but maybe I could look into some student loans. I don't want you to have to shoulder everything. The phrase hung in the air. Student loans. My son would be saddled with debt for a decade, all because Bryant Caldwell wanted a new sports car or another wing on his summer home. All because the system I had given my life to was Fundame. End tally broken. Don't you worry about loans, Tyler, I said, and this time my voice had a new edge to it, a steel that hadn't been there before. You focus on your studies, I will handle the rest, I promise. You sure, Dad? I really don't mind. I'm sure, I cut him off more forcefully than I intended. Trust me on this one. After we hung up, I sat in the silence of my office, the doctored photos and falsified reports still glowing on my screen. I thought about the two promises I was now juggling, the one I'd made to Sarah at her bedside and the one I'd just made to Tyler over the phone. Cellcore had broken its promise to me. They had demonstrated that 12 years of loyalty was a one-way street. That was fine, because it freed me to honor the only promises that ever truly mattered. A new email popped up, a company-wide reminder. 30 days until the Athenis grid launch. 30 days until Bryant Caldwell's coronation. I leaned back in my chair and started the countdown. The idea for the insurance policy wasn't born from a single moment of anger, but from years of quiet observation. It began 4 years ago, long before Bryant Caldwell was CEO, back when he was just the ambitious, silver-tongued COO. I was tasked with a monumental project, to design and implement a new unified master compliance protocol for all of Cellcore's global product launches. It was the least glamorous, most critical job in the company. Everyone else saw it as an exercise in bureaucratic torture, a mountain of paperwork designed to appease lawyers and international regulators. I saw it as an opportunity to build a fortress. During that time, I had a front-row seat to the way Bryant operated. I watched him in meetings, marveling at his ability to take credit for successes he had no hand in and to deflect blame for failures he had personally caused. I saw him push out a brilliant veteran engineer, a man named Marcus who had been with the company for 20 years, simply because Marcus had the audacity to question one of Bryant's ill-conceived project timelines. Bryant didn't fire him outright. He initiated a departmental restructuring, made Marcus's position redundant, and gave him a severance package that was an insult, all while praising his years of service in a company-wide email. It was a masterclass in corporate assassination, clean, quiet, and utterly ruthless. I saw the pattern. Bryant valued loyalty not to the company but to himself. He surrounded himself with sycophants and yes-men, people who wouldn't challenge him. He viewed competence as a commodity and people as disposable. He was a predator who understood the politics of the jungle better than anyone. It was then that I realized that in a system run by a man like Bryant, loyalty and hard work were not shields. They were targets. So as I built the new compliance system, I decided to build a small, hidden feature for myself. It wasn't born of malice, not at first. It came from the Marine Corps principle of planning for the worst. You don't go on patrol hoping you won't get ambushed, you prepare for the ambush. You rig your defenses, set your tripwires, and map out your lines of fire. My fortress needed a dead man's switch. The system I designed was incredibly complex, weaving together thousands of regulatory requirements from dozens of countries. Every product launch had to pass through a series of automated gates, each one verifying compliance with a different set of laws: data privacy, consumer protection, trade restrictions, and so on. The final gate, the one that gave the ultimate green light for a global launch, was the Master Authentication Protocol. It was the last checkpoint before the point of no return. Deep within the code of that final protocol, buried under layers of mundane verification scripts, I embedded my insurance policy. It was an elegant, simple piece of logic. It was a conditional clause that was connected directly to the company's payroll and HR databases. The clause was programmed to search for a very specific set of circumstances. First, it would scan the bonus allocation files at the end of each fiscal year. Second, it would cross-reference the employee list to identify individuals flagged as mission-critical to any upcoming Tier 1 product launch, a designation I had created myself as part of the protocol, which included key personnel in engineering, legal, and of course, risk protocol. The trigger was the final piece. The system would activate only if a mission-critical employee's annual bonus was manually adjusted to zero, and this was the crucial part. The adjustment was authorized by a digital signature carrying C-level executive credentials. It couldn't be an HR error or a managerial decision. It had to be a direct, deliberate act from the highest level of the company. If all three of those conditions were met, the Master Authentication Protocol would be permanently locked. The system wouldn't crash, it wouldn't send up an error flag. It would simply refuse to grant final authentication for any and all subsequent launches. The key to the kingdom would be thrown into a digital ocean, irretrievable without the one person who knew the kill code, me. I called it the Caldwell Clause in my private notes. It was a silent, sleeping guardian of fairness. As long as the company treated its essential people with a baseline of respect, it would never wake up. But if an executive like Bryant ever got arrogant enough to believe he could discard a critical team member without consequence, the system itself would enforce one. It wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. It was about ensuring that the people who built the ship had a failsafe, in case the captain tried to sink it for the insurance money. I was the only one who knew it existed. I didn't tell Roy, I didn't tell my own team. Some defenses are most effective when they are secret. For 4 years it sat there, a ghost in the machine, a silent testament to my lack of faith in the men who ran the company. I honestly never thought it would be used. I hoped it wouldn't be. I hoped that the system of mutual respect, however flawed, would hold. Now sitting at my desk, looking at the evidence of my erasure, I knew that my pessimism had been justified. Bryant hadn't just zeroed out my bonus, he had personally signed off on it, creating the exact set of conditions I had predicted 4 years prior. His arrogance, his belief in his own untouchability, had led him to walk directly into a trap that he didn't even know was there. He thought he was closing a chapter on my career. He had no idea he was starting the final chapter of his own. The system was now armed. The final authentication for the Athenis grid launch, the project that was supposed to be Bryant's crowning achievement, would fail. There was no override, there was no workaround. The lock was absolute, woven into the very fabric of the launch protocol. And in 29 days, when Bryant Caldwell stood on a stage in front of the entire world ready to push the button, he would find that the button was no longer connected to anything. A text message lit up my phone screen. It was from a number I didn't recognize. 5 simple words: "You built the final lock." My blood ran cold for a second. Someone else knew, or at least they suspected. It had to be one of the senior engineers who had helped with the system integration years ago. Someone who was sharp enough to remember the unique architecture of that final protocol. I typed back a single character. The reply was almost instantaneous. "They don't know, good luck." I deleted the thread. It didn't matter who it was. They were an ally, another ghost in the machine watching from the shadows. The plan was in motion. The trap was set. All I had to do now was my job. I had to sit here every day for the next 29 days and watch them march toward a cliff they couldn't see. The final 30 days leading up to the Athenis grid launch were a study in manufactured hysteria. The office transformed into a high-pressure cooker, and Bryant Caldwell was the one gleefully turning up the heat. Banners with obnoxious slogans like "The future is now" and $2.6 billion and counting hung from the ceilings. A massive digital countdown clock was projected onto the lobby wall, each second ticking away with amplified importance. The corporate propaganda machine was in overdrive, and the employees were its fuel. 18-hour days became the norm. People started bringing sleeping bags to the office, creating little nests in unused conference rooms. The entire building smelled of stale pizza, burnt coffee, and the metallic tang of energy drinks. The collective exhaustion was palpable. You could see it in the slumped shoulders, the vacant stares, the frantic, jittery energy of people running on pure adrenaline and caffeine. They were burning themselves out, and Bryant was lauding it as passion and commitment. He orchestrated the whole spectacle with a filmmaker's eye. He'd bring in camera crews to shoot documentary-style footage of the teams working through the night, capturing the heroic sacrifice for a future promotional video. He would stride through the departments in his impeccably tailored suits, a king surveying his loyal subjects, offering hollow words of encouragement. "We're building tomorrow together," he'd boom, clapping some bleary-eyed engineer on the back. It was a performance, and he was the star. The cameras loved him, but I watched the faces of the employees after he walked away. I saw the resentment, the bone-deep weariness. They knew they were being used as props in his story of visionary leadership. One morning, about 10 days before the launch, I was in the break room getting coffee when it happened. A young engineer named Alex, a kid no older than 24 with a brilliant mind and a work ethic that bordered on self-destructive, simply collapsed. He was walking back to his desk, a stack of schematics in his hand, and his legs just gave out. He went down hard, sending papers scattering across the floor. I was the closest to him and rushed over. His skin was pale and clammy, his pulse erratic. He was severely dehydrated and suffering from complete exhaustion. As a few of us gathered around to help, Bryant's voice cut through the concerned murmurs. He had been walking by with a group of investors, giving them a tour of the launch headquarters. He glanced down at the scene, his face a mask of annoyance. "Somebody get him some water and a granola bar," he said dismissively. "We can't afford to lose focus now, we're in the final stretch." He didn't even break stride, continuing his tour as if Alex were nothing more than a minor inconvenience, a piece of faulty equipment. The investors looked uncomfortable, but none of them said a word. I helped get Alex to a quiet room, made him drink some water, and told him to go home. As I walked back to my desk, I could feel Bryant's eyes on me. He saw my act of basic human decency as a form of insubordination. In that moment, this stopped being just about my bonus or my stolen credit. It was about Alex and all the other Alexes in the building who were being run into the ground for one man's ego. This wasn't leadership, this was tyranny. Roy caught up with me later that day, his face grim. "You're the calmest man in this whole building, Warren," he said, shaking his head. "They stole your money, they're trying to erase your career, and Caldwell is treating his employees like cannon fodder. And you just sit there drinking your coffee. It's unnatural." I gave him a small, thin smile. "What's the point of getting worked up, Roy? The outcome is already determined." He narrowed his eyes. "I've known you for a long time. You're not the type to just roll over. You're planning something. I don't know what it is, but it's big." "I'm just doing my job," I repeated, the same line I'd given him before. "Just watching the process unfold." He stared at me for a few seconds longer, then a slow smile spread across his face. He understood. He didn't know the specifics, but he understood the principle. "Well," he said, "I hope the process unfolds exactly the way you want it to." That weekend, Tyler called. "Dad, you sound different," he said, his voice laced with concern. "Quieter, is everything okay over there? The launch must be stressful." "Everything is under control, son," I said, looking out my apartment window at the distant glow of the Cellcore Tower. "Stress is just a state of mind." "Okay, well, I wanted to tell you, Professor Collins is writing my letter of recommendation for the transfer application. He thinks I have a real shot." He hesitated. "About the money, are you really sure? Because I can work more hours." My promise to Sarah echoed in my mind. "Trust me, Tyler," I said, my voice firm and clear. "The money will not be an issue. Everything is going to work out exactly as it should." I felt a sense of finality in those words, a deep, unshakable certainty. I was no longer hoping for a particular outcome, I was simply waiting for it to arrive. The final week was a blur of frantic activity. The building buzzed with a nervous, high-strung energy. I spent most of my time in the compliance control room, a quiet, temperature-controlled space with a wall of monitors displaying the system's status. The launch countdown timer was displayed on the central screen, each second falling away like a drop of water. No one bothered me in there. I was the ghost, the forgotten man, watching over a system they no longer believed was mine. 3 days before launch, I overheard two senior project managers talking anxiously by the coffee machine. "We've run diagnostics on every component except one," the first one said. "That final authentication protocol. Nobody's touched it since Warren built it 4 years ago. Shouldn't we have someone review the code?" The second manager sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. "We should, but he's the only one who truly understands its architecture, and frankly, we're out of time. We just have to trust that it works." I had to hide my smile, trust that it works. It would work perfectly. It would do exactly what it was designed to do. They were walking forward in blind faith, completely unaware that the path ahead ended at a cliff. Bryant's grand vision, his multi-billion-dollar future, was all resting on a piece of code they hadn't bothered to check, a piece of code that was now a loaded gun, aimed directly at the heart of his ambition. All that was left was for him to pull the trigger. Launch day arrived with the pomp and circumstance of a royal wedding. The sun wasn't even fully up, but the financial news networks were already in a frenzy. Headlines blared across screens about Cellcore's revolutionary breakthrough and Bryant Caldwell, the visionary genius behind it all. He company's stock had already surged 11% in pre-market trading on pure speculation. The world, it seemed, had bought into Bryant's myth completely. Inside the building, the atmosphere was electric. The exhaustion of the past few weeks had been replaced by a giddy, manic energy. People were high-fiving in the hallways, their faces flushed with a mixture of relief and anticipation. They had endured the brutal hours, the sleepless nights, the immense pressure, and now they were on the cusp of their reward. They believed their sacrifice had been for a worthy cause. I watched them from a distance, a silent observer in the back of the cavernous auditorium that had been prepared for the main event. It felt like watching a group of people celebrate on the deck of the Titanic. Bryant worked the room like a seasoned politician, gliding from one camera crew to another. His suit was perfect, his smile was blinding, and his confidence was absolute. He posed for photos with beaming investors and delivered smooth, practiced soundbites to reporters. "Today isn't just about a new product," he declared to one journalist, his voice resonating with false humility. "Today, Cellcore redefines the future." The auditorium lights dimmed, and a slick, high-budget promotional video began to play on the giant screens flanking the stage. It was a montage of diverse, happy people using Cellcore products, intercut with dramatic shots of Bryant looking thoughtfully at blueprints and inspiring his teams. The music swelled to a crescendo as the video ended, and Bryant himself strode onto the stage to thunderous applause. He held up a sleek prototype of the Athenis grid, raising it like a trophy. The crowd was eating it up. The flashes from cameras were a constant, blinding strobe effect. For a few minutes, the illusion was perfect. It looked and felt like the birth of a new empire. Then a single spotlight high in the rafters began to flicker. Once, twice. A barely perceptible glitch in the flawless presentation. Most people didn't notice. A reporter from a major tech journal, a woman known for her sharp questions, managed to get the first one in. "Mr. Caldwell, a project of this magnitude must have an incredible risk management team. We haven't seen your director of risk protocol, Warren Cole, today. Is he here?" The question hung in the air, a tiny pinprick in the balloon of Bryant's ego. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face so fast that if you weren't looking for it, you'd miss it. He recovered instantly, giving a dismissive wave to the crowd and launching into his prepared speech, completely ignoring her question. But the seed of doubt had been planted. I saw a few people in the audience exchange curious glances. Up in the press box, a couple of journalists were whispering to each other. Bryant began his speech, his voice full of manufactured passion. This is the culmination of years of tireless innovation and unwavering dedication. This is the moment we've all worked for." On the main screen behind him, the final countdown appeared. 10, 9, 8. The energy in the room was at a fever pitch. People were on their feet. 7, 6, 5. Bryant beamed, his arms spread wide, ready to receive the adoration of the world. 4, 3, 2. I saw Roy sitting about halfway to the front catch my eye from the back of the room. He gave me a slow, almost imperceptible nod. 1. The moment the countdown hit 0, there was no explosion of celebratory music. There were no digital fireworks. Instead, every single screen in the auditorium, the massive stage screens, the monitors in the press box, the tablets in the investors' hands, simultaneously flashed a single terrifying color: blood red. A shrill, piercing alarm tone blared through the sound system, cutting through the stunned silence. Then, in huge, stark white letters, a message appeared on every screen. License authentication failed. Trigger mission-critical bonus void. Authorization signature B. Caldwell. For a full 3 seconds, the room was utterly silent, paralyzed by a collective state of shock and confusion. Then chaos erupted. Reporters were shouting into their phones. Investors were scrambling, their faces masks of panic. On the sides of the stage, the engineering team was hammering frantically at their laptops, their expressions morphing from confusion to horror as they realized they were completely locked out of their own system. The stock tickers, which had been displayed proudly on the side screens, began to plummet in real time, the green numbers flipping to red in a dizzying, catastrophic cascade. On stage, Bryant's face had gone a ghostly white. The charismatic CEO was gone, replaced by a panicked man in an expensive suit. He grabbed the microphone, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and fear. "Restart the system. What are you doing? Roll back to the last save point. Do something." But his orders were useless. As shouting at a fire he himself had set. Suddenly, a voice pierced the chaos. It was Preston Wade. He was standing near the front, his face pale, pointing a trembling finger toward the stage. "The protocol," he shouted, his voice amplified by a nearby microphone. "Warren Cole's protocol, he designed it with failsafes, he warned us about this." And just like that, hundreds of heads turned in my direction. The ghost they had tried so hard to erase was suddenly the only person in the room who mattered. I didn't move. I just stood there, my hands clasped behind my back, and watched. I watched the empire crumble. I watched the frantic, useless attempts to fix the unfixable. I watched Bryant Caldwell, the great visionary, stand frozen on his stage of failure, exposed to the world as a fraud. It took him nearly 20 minutes to find me. He stormed into the compliance control room, which was now the de facto crisis center, his perfect suit now rumpled, his tie askew. His face was a thunderous mask of fury. He slammed a crumpled piece of paper down on my console. It was a printout of my $0 bonus confirmation. "You did this," he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "You sabotaged this entire company." I looked down at the paper, at his arrogant signature at the bottom. Then I looked back up at him, my expression calm, my voice even and steady. "You signed it, sir," I said quietly. "The system just followed the protocol you authorized." The room fell silent. The handful of engineers and executives around us froze, their eyes wide. The simple, undeniable truth of my words hit Bryant like a physical blow. The rage in his eyes flickered, replaced by a dawning, sickening realization. He hadn't been sabotaged. He had been outmaneuvered. He had sprung his own trap. His signature was the weapon. His arrogance was the ammunition. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Tyler. "Dad, I'm seeing some crazy stuff on the news about Cellcore. Are you okay?" I typed back a simple reply, "Never been better, son." Bryant just stood there, speechless, as the sound of jeering laughter drifted in from the auditorium, where a reporter was mercilessly grilling another executive on live television. The beautiful, intricate machine of his ambition had been dismantled, not by an attack, but by a simple, unbreakable rule I had written 4 years ago. Mission complete. I didn't wait for the dust to settle. While Bryant stood paralyzed in the control room, grappling with the magnitude of his self-inflicted wound, I calmly began to pack the few personal items from my desk into a small cardboard box. My favorite coffee mug, a framed photo of Sarah and a much younger Tyler, a worn copy of a book on military strategy. 12 years of my life fit neatly into a box that used to hold printer paper. As I walked out of the control room, the chaos was still in full swing. Executives were shouting into phones, lawyers were huddled in panicked groups, and the remaining employees just stared at their dark screens with looks of shell-shocked disbelief. No one tried to stop me. In their eyes, I was either the saboteur who had destroyed them or the genius who had seen this coming. Either way, they knew my time here was over. The lobby was a media circus. Reporters were swarming, shouting questions at anyone in a suit. I navigated through the chaos, keeping my head down, just another faceless employee leaving the scene of a disaster. As I pushed through the main doors, a cool, steady rain was beginning to fall, washing the city in a clean, gray light. It felt like a baptism, a rinsing away of the last 12 years. I didn't look back at the glass tower of Cellcore. There was nothing there for me anymore. My phone rang as I reached my truck in the parking garage. It was Tyler, his voice a mixture of awe and confusion. "Dad, the news is saying the entire launch failure was traced back to a security protocol tied to an executive signature. They're saying the CEO zeroed out the bonus of a key employee and it triggered a system-wide lockdown. Dad, was that you?" I tossed the box onto the passenger seat and started the engine. Let's just say the company had a policy, I told him, and for the first time in a long time they were forced to follow it. He was quiet for a moment, then what happens now? I smiled, the first genuine, unburdened smile I'd felt in years. Now, I said, I keep the promise I made to your mom. Start packing your bags, son. We're going to go visit some college campuses, the real ones. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Seriously, but Dad, the money. The money is no longer a problem, I said. It turns out my retirement plan was a lot more effective than I ever imagined. That night, for the first time in 3 years, the house didn't feel empty. Tyler and I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he used to slave over his used textbooks, and we filled out transfer applicat. Ions to 3 of the best engineering schools in the country. The television in the living room was on, providing a running commentary on the day's events. Cellcor's stock had closed down 62%. Analysts were calling it one of the most catastrophic, self-inflicted corporate disasters in modern history. Bryant Caldwell had been forced to issue a humiliating public apology before announcing his immediate resignation. They played the clip of him on stage, his face pale and frozen, over and over again. Tyler kept looking over at me, a new kind of respect in his eyes. He wasn't looking at his tired, overworked dad anymore. He was looking at a man he was just beginning to understand. Did you really take down a whole multi-billion-dollar company by yourself? He asked, his voice low. I thought about it for a moment, circling the admissions essay prompt with a pen. No, son, I said. Bryant Caldwell took down his own company. He just used a tool that I built. I didn't break the system. I just made sure it worked exactly the way it was supposed to. Sometimes holding people to the rules they write for others is the most effective weapon there is. A few months later, the acceptance letters started to arrive. Tyler got into all 3 schools. His first choice, a top-tier university with a world-renowned engineering program, offered him a full academic scholarship. The day that letter came, I took it to the cemetery and read it aloud to Sarah. I told her I had kept my promise. The fallout from the Cellcore implosion was extensive. The company was eventually acquired for pennies on the dollar by a competitor, and most of the executive team was let go. Preston Wade, the poor kid who had been the face of my work, ended up being a key witness in the shareholder lawsuits that followed. Roy Martinez landed on his feet, getting a great job with the company that bought Cellcore's assets. He sends me a text every year on the anniversary of the launch, always the same message. Quiet and explosion it was. As for Bryant, the last I heard, he was working in a mid-level consulting job for a small firm out in Texas. No more magazine covers, no more keynote speeches. Just a man forced to learn the lesson that integrity isn't just a word in a mission statement. It's a protocol, and violating it has consequences. I never set out for revenge. I set out to build a system with integrity, a system that was fair. When the man in charge decided to operate without either, the system simply did its job, and in doing so, it gave my son his future and it gave me back my peace.